He had spent his entire life chasing something he couldn't quite hold in his hands, a piece of earth to call his own. Not just a house, not just a roof and walls, but a place where the sky stretched wide and the land breathed under his feet. A place where the noise of the world faded into the sound of the wind and the rustling of trees. For as long as Samuel could remember, he had dreamed of owning a ranch, a quiet corner of the world where he could wake up each morning and feel free. But dreams, he had learned, don't always come easy. Life had a way of pulling you in other directions. Bills to pay, mouths to feed, responsibilities that piled up faster than the years. Samuel worked hard, harder than most, spending decades pouring his strength into jobs that wore his body down but built a future for his family. He never complained. It was a good life, filled with honest work and proud moments. But somewhere deep inside, the boy who once dreamed of wide-open fields and the smell of fresh earth never stopped hoping. Now, at 68 years old, Samuel often sat on his porch at the edge of town, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. He had built a modest life, a small house, a steady pension, children who loved him. He had every reason to be content. And yet, there was a part of him that still ached for that dream he had tucked away so many years ago. Was it too late? Was it foolish to still hope? What made him believe it was still possible after all this time? If you're still here, feel free to subscribe. Sometimes, the dreams we carry longest are the ones that matter most. Samuel thought often about those early days, the afternoons spent at his grandfather's farm, riding old ponies, chasing chickens, lying in the fields staring up at the endless sky. It wasn't just about owning land. It was about freedom. About living life on his own terms, without the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. It was about waking up to the sunrise and feeling like he belonged to the earth and the earth belonged to him. He had talked himself out of it for years. Too expensive. Too risky. Too late. Practicality had a voice louder than dreams sometimes. But lately, practicality had started to lose its grip. Samuel wasn't getting any younger. His body reminded him of that every morning when he swung his legs out of bed and felt the ache in his knees. Time, he realized, wasn't something he could bargain with anymore. If he was ever going to chase this dream, it had to be now. The thought scared him. It thrilled him, too. One evening, as he flipped through the local paper more out of habit than anything else, he saw it. A small ad. Ranch for sale. Not a sprawling estate, not some grand, expensive piece of land. Just a few acres, a weathered house, a barn that needed some love. It wasn't perfect. But neither was Samuel. And maybe that was the point. He folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table, his hands trembling slightly. His heart raced the way it hadn't in years. Was this it? Was this the chance he thought had passed him by? He didn't know yet. But he knew one thing. The dream he had carried his whole life was knocking at his door. And this time, he was ready to answer. Samuel's love for open land and wide skies had been planted in his heart long before he understood what it truly meant. As a boy, he spent summers running barefoot across his grandfather's small farm in Oklahoma, chasing after chickens and feeling the earth warm and alive beneath his feet. He remembered the smell of the hayloft, the lowing of cattle in the early mornings, and the way the sun looked as it melted into the horizon at dusk. Back then, everything felt endless: time, energy, possibilities. He admired his grandfather, a tough but gentle man who seemed to belong to the land as naturally as the trees and the streams. Samuel watched him work with his calloused hands, repairing fences, feeding animals, tending the fields. His grandfather never had much, but he had something Samuel came to treasure more than anything else: peace. A kind of quiet satisfaction that no money could buy. It was there, in the hum of the barn in the afternoon heat, in the crackling of the fire at night, in the slow, steady way he moved through each day. Samuel wanted that peace for himself one day. But as he grew older, life, as it so often does, pulled him away from those simple dreams. His parents moved to the city when he was just a teenager, chasing better jobs and a more stable life. Samuel traded the fields for sidewalks, the open sky for rows of rooftops. He didn't complain. He understood even then that his family was doing what they had to do. Still, deep down, a part of him always felt out of place. After high school, he went straight to work. First in a warehouse, then at a construction company, eventually finding steady hours in a manufacturing plant. It was good, honest work. Work he was proud of. He met a girl named Helen, married her in a small ceremony at the town church, and together they built a life. They had 2 children, a modest house, dreams of vacations they couldn't always afford, but talked about anyway. Samuel never spoke much about the ranch dream. It felt too far away, too selfish maybe, when there were bills to pay, schools to save for, cars to fix. He tucked it away in the back of his mind like an old photograph, a beautiful memory you glance at sometimes, knowing it might never be more than a dream. But it never left him. Every now and then, when the factory noise grew too loud or the city lights drowned out the stars, he would close his eyes and remember those quiet fields, the slow mornings, the honest work, the feeling of belonging to something real and alive. He had promised himself, once, that when the time was right, he would find his way back. He just didn't know it would take so long. Samuel's life unfolded like the ticking of a steady clock. Work, home, bills, responsibilities. There was always something that needed to be done, someone who needed him to show up, to be strong, to provide. And Samuel never hesitated. He was a man who honored his promises, even when they meant setting his own dreams quietly aside. The years blurred together, as they often do when duty becomes the rhythm of your days. He took extra shifts when the plant needed him, stayed late when machines broke down, and rarely complained when paychecks barely stretched far enough. Helen managed the home with grace, raising the children with love and discipline, making sure Samuel came home to warmth and laughter even when the world outside felt hard. There were moments, here and there, when Samuel thought about the ranch. Driving past open fields on the way to work. Seeing a sunset blaze across the sky as he sat in traffic. Hearing a distant country song playing on the radio, singing about simpler lives and open roads. For a heartbeat, the old longing would stir in him, but then reality would pull him back. There were braces to pay for, college savings to build, plumbing to fix, taxes to file. You're building something real, Helen would say when she caught him staring too long at the horizon. You're giving us everything we need. And he knew she was right. Still, he sometimes wondered if there would be anything left for him at the end of it all. Would there be time? Would there be strength? When their children grew up and moved out, Samuel thought maybe, just maybe, there would be a little room now for old dreams to breathe again. But then Helen got sick. A quiet kind of sickness that stole her strength little by little. Samuel became her caregiver, the steady hand she could rely on, the warm voice she needed in the long, aching nights. For 3 years, he was her anchor, her shield. And when she finally slipped away one soft morning, Samuel found himself standing in a house that felt too big, too quiet, too far from everything he had once dreamed of. The ranch felt farther away than ever. He went back to work for a while after Helen's passing, not because he needed the money, though that helped, but because he didn't know how to be still. His hands needed something to do, his mind needed somewhere to go. But each year, the weight of time pressed a little harder on his shoulders. His body moved slower, his days stretched longer. And yet, despite everything, that dream, that boyhood image of fields and sunrise and belonging stayed alive in him. Quiet, patient, undiminished by the years. It waited for him, just like the wide-open land had always waited. Maybe, he thought, life hadn't finished surprising him yet. The urgency didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a draft slipping under the door on a cold morning. Samuel began to feel it in the quiet spaces of his days, the long stretches of time after breakfast when there was no one to talk to, no task demanding his attention. He felt it when he walked past the old photo albums Helen had so carefully put together, pictures of their children growing up, of holidays filled with laughter, of a life well lived but always busy, always focused on everyone else. For so many years, he had been needed. Every decision, every sacrifice had a clear purpose. Now, at 68, the weight of the empty spaces settled deeper into his bones. And somewhere inside him, the boy who had once dreamed of running free across open fields began to stir again. A soft voice, growing louder each morning, asking a simple question. If not now, Then when? One evening, Samuel sat outside on his small back porch, the same place he had watched countless sunsets with Helen by his side. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. He watched the last sliver of sun sink below the horizon, the sky exploding in colors he couldn't name. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to truly want something. Not for his children, not for his job, not for anyone but himself. He wanted a place where he could wake up to the sound of birds instead of traffic. He wanted mornings spent walking through fields, afternoons fixing up a barn, nights sitting by a fire under a sky full of stars. He wanted work that was slow and honest, not rushed by schedules or weighed down by worries. He wanted peace, the kind you don't find unless you go looking for it. It wasn't about running away from life. It was about running towards something he had carried inside him for more than half a century. But even wanting it brought fear. He wasn't young anymore. Moving to a ranch wasn't just about buying land. It was about strength, about will, about starting over in a way most men his age didn't dare. Could he handle the physical demands? Could he live alone without feeling the sharp edge of loneliness that had already carved out too much of his heart? And yet, as he sat there with the night gathering around him, Samuel realized that the fear of trying was far smaller than the fear of regret. He had given his whole life to others, willingly, gladly. Maybe now it was time to give something back to himself. The next morning, he woke early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. At the top, he wrote 2 words. Find land. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And for Samuel, beginnings were something worth believing in again. Samuel didn't waste any more time once he decided it was now or never. Every morning after his coffee, he got in his old pickup truck and drove through the country roads outside town, letting his eyes roam over every fence line, every field, every worn-down barn that stood against the wide blue sky. Every patch of land stirred something deep in him, not just a longing, but a belonging, like his spirit recognized what his body had yet to claim. At first, he was hopeful. Some places looked promising from the road, open fields, clusters of trees, old houses that still stood proudly after decades. But hope quickly met reality. Prices were high, higher than he had expected, even for broken-down places that needed more work than he could imagine taking on alone. Some ranches were too far from town, the isolation stretching beyond what Samuel thought was safe at his age. Others were too much land for one man to manage. Every time he found something close to right, something else, the price, the distance, the repairs, would pull it just out of reach. Each drive home felt a little heavier. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. His mind argued with itself. Maybe it was foolish to believe he could do this now. Maybe some dreams belonged to the young. Maybe he had missed his window, and there was no going back. But every time he tried to let go of the dream, it clung to him even harder. Some nights, long after the town had gone quiet, Samuel would sit at the kitchen table with the old lamp glowing above him. He flipped through property listings in the newspaper, browsed worn-out websites with slow-loading pictures, scribbled notes on scraps of paper. He would draw little maps, imagining where the barn might go, where the garden could be planted, where he might sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over his own piece of land. It wasn't about finding the perfect place anymore. It was about finding a place that felt right, even if it was rough around the edges, just like him. The rejections came steadily. Sellers looking for quick money. Land too broken to restore. Dreams that looked pretty from the road but fell apart up close. And yet, Samuel kept looking. Every no, every disappointment, every long ride back to his empty house only made his resolve grow deeper. He didn't want to live the rest of his days wondering what if. Then one afternoon, after another fruitless search, Samuel stopped at a dusty little diner off the highway. The place smelled like strong coffee and fried onions, and the bell over the door jingled like an old friend welcoming him back. He sat at the counter, nursing a coffee, tired but not ready to quit. The waitress, a woman with silver hair tucked into a bun and a name tag that read Carol, noticed the stack of papers he shuffled through. Looking for something special? She asked with a kind smile. Samuel chuckled under his breath. Maybe a miracle. Carol poured him another cup of coffee and leaned closer. "Well, if you're looking for land, you might want to check out the Adams place. It's not listed. Been sitting quiet since Bill passed. His daughter's hoping to find someone who'll love it the way he did." Samuel's heart gave a small, cautious leap. He wrote down the number she offered, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his shirt pocket like something precious. Driving away from the diner, for the first time in a long time, he felt the sharp thrill of possibility in his chest again. He turned onto a gravel road lined with ancient oak trees, the branches arching like old friends reaching out to greet him. And then he saw it, a small house, a red barn faded to a dusty pink by the sun, a wide stretch of untamed land reaching toward the horizon. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't polished. But to Samuel, it looked like hope. And for the first time in many, many years, he allowed himself to believe, maybe, just maybe, the dream he had carried his whole life had been waiting for him, patient and sure, just like this. The gravel crunched under Samuel's boots as he stepped out of his truck, standing still for a moment to take it all in. The ranch had a kind of quiet dignity, even with the peeling paint and the weeds growing along the fence line. It wasn't polished or pristine, but neither was he. It looked like a place that had lived a full life and still had life left to give. A car pulled up not long after he arrived, and a woman in her 40s climbed out, brushing the dust from her jeans. She had her father's eyes, Samuel thought immediately, kind, steady, a little cautious but not unfriendly. She introduced herself as Marjorie Adams, Bill's daughter, and shook Samuel's hand firmly. They didn't waste time with small talk. Marjorie led him through the property, pointing out the old barn that leaned slightly but still stood proud, the corral that needed mending, the orchard her father had planted decades ago, now wild and overgrown. She spoke with a mixture of pride and sorrow, as if every word was both a memory and a farewell. Samuel listened carefully, feeling every word settle into him like roots taking hold. He could see it, not the broken fences, not the chipped paint, but the life this place could have again. He pictured himself fixing the barn door, mending the corral rails, planting new crops in the stubborn, forgiving earth. He could almost hear the creak of the porch swing in the late afternoon sun, smell the fresh-cut grass on a Saturday morning. They reached the edge of the pasture, where the land rolled out in soft, wide waves under the open sky. Marjorie stopped, looking out over it. Her voice softened. Daddy loved this place. He always said he didn't own it. He just took care of it for a little while. Samuel swallowed hard, feeling the truth of that settle deep in his chest. He wanted someone who'd feel the same way, she added, turning to look at him. For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. He just looked at the land, at the house, at the barn, at the dream he thought he might have lost, standing right here waiting for him. "I'm not a rich man," Samuel said finally, his voice steady but low. "I can't promise fancy improvements. But I can promise this. I'll take care of it. I'll make it live again." Marjorie smiled, a real, tired, grateful smile. That's all he ever wanted. They walked back to the house, the sun beginning its slow descent in the sky, painting everything in golden light. As they stood on the porch, Samuel took a deep breath. It smelled of dust and wood and something else, possibility. He knew, deep down, this was his chance. Maybe the house wasn't grand. Maybe the land wasn't perfect. But life rarely was. And that made it all the more precious. Sometimes, Samuel thought, the right place doesn't find you when you're young and strong. Sometimes, it waits until you've learned exactly how much it's worth. The next few days moved in a kind of haze, a blur of papers, phone calls, and quiet moments where Samuel would sit at his kitchen table, staring at the numbers scribbled on a pad. Buying the ranch wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't a wealthy man. He had some savings, a modest pension, the house he lived in now, but no hidden fortune waiting to be spent. Every dollar counted, and buying this piece of land would mean selling nearly everything he had worked for all his life. The thought was terrifying. He sat there one evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor, thinking about all he would be giving up. His house was small, but it was familiar. His neighborhood was quiet, his routines well-worn. Trading all of that for the unknown, for a ranch that needed more work than he might have strength for, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, toes curled over the edge, heart pounding. He called his son, Michael, that night. They talked often, but Samuel had kept the search mostly to himself until now. He needed to hear his son's voice, needed someone to listen as he spilled out everything, the dream, the land, the risks, the hope. Michael listened patiently. When Samuel finished, there was a long pause. Then Michael said quietly, "Dad, you've spent your whole life taking care of us. You never did a selfish thing. If this is your dream, maybe it's time you chose yourself." Samuel's throat tightened. He hadn't realized until that moment just how much permission he needed, not legal permission, but emotional permission. The kind that says it's okay to chase something just because your heart wants it. "If you're still here," Samuel whispered, speaking not only to Michael but maybe even to Helen's memory floating somewhere in that kitchen, "maybe it means this dream is still waiting for me. If you're still watching, maybe this story touched a place inside you too." Feel free to subscribe and join us in keeping dreams alive. The next morning, Samuel called Marjorie. They met at the little diner where he had first heard about the ranch. Over coffee, Samuel made the offer he could afford, less than what others might pay, less than the land's raw value, but more than fair for a man who intended to love it, not flip it. Marjorie didn't hesitate long. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she recognized, the same deep-rooted love for land her father had carried. She smiled, shook his hand, and said, "It's yours, Mr. Samuel. Daddy would have liked you." Driving back home after signing the first papers, Samuel felt a rush of emotions he hadn't felt in decades. Fear, yes, but excitement, too. Gratitude. Hope. His heart beat hard in his chest, alive with the knowledge that he had just changed the course of his life. He wasn't sure what lay ahead. Fences to mend, roofs to patch, fields to clear, mornings that would demand more from him than he had given in years. But it didn't scare him anymore. Because now, for the first time since he was a barefoot boy running across his grandfather's farm, Samuel had a place of his own. A place where the earth waited for him, patient and sure. A place to finally call home. Moving day came faster than Samuel expected. There wasn't much to pack. Over the years, he had learned to live simply, a few pieces of furniture, boxes of old books, framed photos from a life well lived. As he stood in the empty living room of the house he was leaving behind, Samuel felt a mix of emotions stirring inside him. Sadness for all the memories made here. Gratitude for the shelter it had given him. But most of all, excitement, a rare, precious kind of excitement that buzzed low in his chest. The drive to the ranch was short, but every mile felt like a step toward a new life. The road narrowed, the houses thinned out, and then, at last, he turned onto the gravel drive lined with oak trees. The place looked the same as it had the first day he saw it, weathered, worn, and waiting. Samuel parked the truck and stepped out. The air smelled sweeter here, full of grass and earth and promise. A soft breeze stirred the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, its call stretching high into the open sky. He carried his things inside slowly, savoring the moment. Each box he set down, each piece of furniture he placed, felt like staking a small, quiet claim. This was his now. His walls. His floors. His land. The house was small, a kitchen with cracked tile, a living room with a sagging couch left behind, a bedroom with windows that faced the sunrise. There was a sagging barn out back and a well that needed repairs. The fields were overgrown, the fences in desperate need of mending. It was, by any outside measure, a tired place. But to Samuel, it was beautiful. That first evening, he pulled an old rocking chair out onto the porch and sat down, a blanket draped over his legs as the sun melted into the fields. The silence was different here. Not heavy, not empty. Alive. Full of crickets and the rustle of grass, the creak of the barn shifting in the cooling air. Samuel rocked slowly, his heart steady, his hands relaxed in his lap. He didn't need the perfect ranch. He didn't need hundreds of acres or gleaming white fences. He needed this rough, honest place that matched his soul. A place he could care for, grow into, leave better than he found it. As the stars blinked awake one by one in the wide velvet sky, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: complete. The boy who had dreamed of owning a ranch, the young man who had sacrificed those dreams for responsibility, the older man who had feared it was too late, they all sat together now, one heart, one man, finally home. And if you're still watching, maybe you, too, know that sometimes dreams take their time finding us. Like the land waiting for Samuel, maybe your dream is out there, patient, sure, and still within reach. Samuel woke with the first light, the soft gold of dawn seeping through the thin curtains of his new bedroom. The old rooster he had heard the day before from some neighboring property, maybe, let out a proud, scratchy crow in the distance. Samuel smiled to himself as he sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on his worn boots. His muscles ached from the move, his joints stiff with the cool morning air, but there was a kind of energy humming through him that he hadn't felt in years. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the start of the life he had been dreaming of since he was a boy. He stepped outside, the screen door creaking behind him. The land stretched out before him, still damp with morning dew, the fields wild and untamed. The barn leaned slightly to the right, the fences sagged in places, and the pasture was more weeds than grass, but to Samuel it was perfect. He made himself a strong pot of coffee and carried a chipped mug out to the porch, sitting once again in his rocking chair. Max, the old dog who had come with the property, a gentle soul with graying fur and kind eyes, padded up and rested his head on Samuel's knee. Samuel scratched behind his ears, grateful for the company. He hadn't expected a dog, but maybe, just like the land, Max had been waiting for someone too. The first weeks were filled with work, hard work. Samuel mended fences board by board, using muscles that protested every hammer swing. He patched the roof of the barn with salvaged wood. He cleared weeds from the front of the house until his hands were raw and blistered. At night, he would sink into bed utterly exhausted, every bone in his body sore. But he slept better than he had in years. There was something about building a life with his own two hands again, about seeing the direct result of his effort in the repaired gate or the tidied field, that gave him a satisfaction nothing else had ever matched. He didn't need anyone to tell him he was doing a good job. The land itself answered him, in the way the grass started growing stronger, the way the barn stood a little straighter, the way the mornings felt cleaner, sharper. Neighbors began to stop by, one or two at a time. Old farmers with hands like leather and smiles as wide as the sky. They offered advice, sometimes tools, sometimes just stories over a cup of coffee. Samuel welcomed them all, feeling the slow, steady pulse of community weaving its way back into his life. One evening, sitting by the fire pit he had built behind the house, Max curled up at his feet and the stars spread endlessly above, Samuel thought about all the years he had waited, about all the reasons he could have given up. And he was glad he hadn't. If you're still here, maybe you, too, know what it's like to hold on to a dream longer than you ever thought you could. Maybe you know the fear of chasing it too late, and maybe you're wondering if it's still worth it. Samuel would tell you it is. Always. Samuel often sat on the porch in the evenings now, watching the way the light stretched across his land, touching the fields with soft gold before slipping away into the horizon. Max would be there, dozing at his feet, the warm breeze carrying the scent of fresh earth and distant wildflowers. It was in these moments, simple, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else, that Samuel felt the true weight of what he had achieved. It wasn't the size of the ranch that mattered. It wasn't the old house or the barn with its creaky boards. It was what it all represented. A lifetime of dreams tucked into a small, stubborn corner of his heart. A lifetime of hard work, sacrifice, patience. Every road he had walked, every decision he had made, every moment he had doubted, they had all led him here. He thought back to the long years of putting everyone else first, of thinking maybe it was too late for him. He remembered the days when hope felt like a foolish thing, something better suited for the young. And yet, here he was, proof that dreams don't have expiration dates. They simply wait for us to be ready to claim them. Samuel knew now that it had never been about the land itself. It was about the peace that came from listening to the small voice inside you, the one that never stops whispering, no matter how much life tries to drown it out. The voice that says, "You're allowed to want this. You're allowed to chase it. You're allowed to believe it's still possible. And now, every sunrise that poured through his windows, every slow walk across the fields, every night under the stars, they weren't just gifts. They were victories. Silent, humble, hard-earned victories. If you've ever carried a dream in your heart, whether for a year or a lifetime, Samuel's story is for you. It's a reminder that no matter your age, no matter the setbacks, no matter the doubts, the dreams that matter most never truly leave us. They wait for the moment we are brave enough to reach for them again. And when we do, they welcome us home. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Tell us, what dream are you still holding on to? Like this video if you believe it's never too late to chase what sets your soul on fire. And subscribe to join a community that knows it's never too late to dream, to believe, and to begin again. Because the life you imagine is still waiting for you, just like Samuel's ranch was waiting for him.